Welcome to Let's Pod Crime. Each week I cover crimes from around the world and all across history. If you have any crimes you would want covered, contact me at TheStudyDog on Twitter. If movies are more your thing, check out Let's Pod Movies, where we cover all aspects of movies with laughter and disagreement along the way. This week I will be concluding the horrific story of the Toolbox Killer, Lawrence Bittaker and Roy Norris. If you missed last week's episode, please go back and have a listen to it, and learn how we got to this stage. Warning, this week's episode contains very graphic descriptions of the events that occurred. The pair would purchase a 1970 GMC Vandura van, which they nicknamed Murder Mac. It had no rear seats in, the windows had been covered up with curtains on the inside. They fitted a bed in the rear of it, which they stored tools, clothes and a cooler underneath the bed. The cooler was filled with beer and soft drinks. One of the pair's MO was to drive down to Redondo Beach and drink beer, smoke weed and hang out with the girls around there. Over a 5-month spell in 1979 between February and June, the pair have known to have at least picked up around 20 female hitchhikers. These were the lucky ones. The pair did not assault these girls, they were just seen as practice runs to the main event in their eyes. On one of their trips they spotted a very secluded fire road, which is designed to help stop the spread of wildfires, so there was little to no traffic going near it. Bittaker would break the padlock off and replace it with one of his own, giving them the sole access to the road via vehicles. You might think that this is a large number of trusting hitchhikers, and to be fair, it is. But you have to remember this was in the 70s, when people were more trusting, they were in LA, and many females were chasing that big dream, and they needed to save money wherever possible. On the 24th of June 1979, the pair would kidnap, rape, murder and discard their first victim, like she was a piece of used meat. Lucinda Schieffer was last seen alive leaving a church meeting on Redondo Beach at approximately 7:46 p.m. She was a slight-built blonde 16-year-old, to which Norris remarked to Bittaker, "There's a cute little blonde." The pair tried to entice her into the van with their supply of weed and alcohol, but she wasn't interested. So they decided to drive ahead of her and sit in the van in a side street. When she got nearer to the van, Norris engaged brief conversation with her before dragging her inside. Bittaker would turn the music up to full volume immediately to deafen out any signs or sounds of struggles and screams, while Norris bound her arms and legs and gagged her mouth with duct tape. They then drove off to the fire road, out of sight from the world. Lucinda wouldn't scream for long though, and remained quite composed. Bittaker wrote in his account of the night that she has displayed a magnificent state of self-control and composed acceptance of the conditions of which she had no control. She shed no tears, offered no resistance, and expressed no great concern for her safety. I guess she knew what was coming. Norris ordered Bittaker to go take a walk. He was away for roughly 1 hour, in which time Norris raped her. When Bittaker returned, Norris left, and he too raped the poor little girl. This would happen at least one more known time each, with Norris returning to her. While he was alone with her, Lucinda asked him if they intend to kill her. Norris replied, "No." The poor abused girl wanted one thing, and that was to pray one last time if they were going to kill her. In their statement, they would both claim that they wanted to free her, with the other wanting to murder her. Clearly, their bond wasn't as close as they thought. Whoever wanted to do what? Norris was first to try to kill her. He wrapped his hands around her neck and started to strangle her. After approximately 45 seconds, in his words, the look in her eyes was too disturbing. He got off her, ran to the front of the van and started to vomit. Bittaker, on the other hand, would not suffer with the look in her eyes, as he started to strangle her, not letting go until she collapsed on the floor and started convulsing. This would lead to the first time tools would become involved, and where they would get their trademark from. Bittaker took a wired coat hanger, put it around her neck, got a pair of vice grip pliers and twisted the coat hanger until it choked the remaining life out of Lucinda. They then wrapped her body in a plastic shower curtain and threw her down the steep canyon. Bittaker assured Norris that the animals would eat her up, so there wouldn't be any evidence left. Just 2 weeks later, on the 8th of July 1979, the pair spotted their second target, Andrea Joy Hall. At first they spotted the 18-year-old hitchhiking down the Pacific Coast Highway. They pulled over to offer her a lift, however another car had done the same and she went with the other offer. Not to be put off by this, they drove behind the car and followed it until Hall exited at Redondo Beach. They pulled up beside her and started talking to her. This time, however, the offer of a free beer worked. Bittaker once again drove, while this time Norris hid behind a sheet in the back so Hall would think Bittaker was alone. As she reached inside to grab a beer, Norris pounced on her. At first he struggled to get her into the van, but he soon started to get the upper hand and once again tied her arms and feet up and duct taped her mouth shut. And they headed towards the fire road once more. This time Bittaker would rape her twice and Norris once. The second time that Bittaker was abusing her, Norris thought he saw headlights approaching, so Bittaker dragged Hall into some bushes covering her mouth, while Norris set off in the van after the headlights. However, he found nothing. The pair decided to drive deeper into the San Gabriel Mountains. Hall was made to walk up the hill alongside the van completely naked. When they finally stopped, she was made to perform oral sex on Bittaker. I wish he had bitten his cock off. Before being ordered to pose for several Polaroid photos, a trait they would add to their MO. Bittaker then walked her further up the mountain, while Norris drove to the store to buy more alcohol. However, when Norris returned, he only saw Bittaker with no sign of Hall. Bittaker had told Andrea he was going to kill her and she had to beg for her life, giving him the best reasons as to why she should be spared. During this time he took 2 more photos of her. Norris would later describe the expression on her face as showing nothing but sheer terror. Bittaker clearly wasn't impressed by her reasons, as he took an ice pick and thrusted it into her ear, forcing it into her brain. He then turned her over and did exactly the same thing, grabbed another ice pick and pushed it into her other ear. He then stamped on it so much and so hard that the handle actually broke off. He then started to strangle her before throwing her lifeless corpse off the side of the cliff. On the 3rd of September, just 4 weeks after killing Andrea Hall, they spotted 2 young girls sitting at a bus stop on Hermosa Beach, Jackie Doris Gillum and Jacqueline Leah Lamp. The pair had been hitchhiking along the Pacific Coast Highway. Little did they realise they were being observed and followed by these 2 horrible, horrible bastards. While they were resting at the bus stop, the van pulled up and offered the girl a lift, which they accepted. They got into the van and started to smoke weed, with their new kind friends offering them a lift. However, the girls soon noticed that they weren't going in the correct direction, and you've guessed it, they were headed towards a fire road, hidden in the mountains. What made this incident even more disturbing was that Jackie was 15 years old, while Jacqueline was only 13. When the girls questioned why they were heading in the wrong direction, the 2 men tried to make up excuses, which neither girl believed. Jacqueline, the 13-year-old, tried to open the sliding door to the van to escape, but Norris hit her over the back of the head with a bag filled with lead weights, knocking the young girl unconscious. He quickly turned his attentions to Jackie, easily overpowering her, where once again he started to tie her arms and legs together. However, he failed to notice that Jacqueline had regained consciousness, and she once again tried to flee. Norris grabbed her, twisting her arm behind her back and dragged her into the van. The incident happened in full sight of the road, and fearful that someone would drive past, Bittaker turned and punched Jackie in the face, before assisting Norris to bound and gag both girls. They drove the van deeper into the mountains and held the girls captive for almost 2 full days, where they both suffered physical and sexual abuse from both men. Bittaker and Norris slept in the van alongside the girls, taking it in turn to be on lookout. Bittaker walked Jacqueline, the younger of the girls, up the nearby hill, and forced her to pose for pornographic photographs. He also made Norris take photos of himself and Jackie both together, both fully nude and closed-in photos. Bittaker raped Jackie at least 3 times, where once he recorded it, forcing the girl to pretend he was his cousin, and he encouraged her to express her pain. He also tortured her by stabbing her breast with an ice pick, and he also used a vice grip to tear off part of one of her nipples. After almost 2 days of abuse, rape and torture, they finally put the girls out of their misery and murdered them. Norris claimed he had suggested that Jackie should be killed quickly as she had cooperated. Bittaker replied, "No, they only die once anyway." It does make you question what he had in mind for Jacqueline, since she tried to flee at least 2 times. Jackie, just like Hall, had an ice pick thrust into her ear before being strangled to death. Jacqueline was forced out of the van, where Bittaker shouted at her, "You wanted to stay a virgin, now you die a virgin," before Norris swung a sledgehammer and hit her in the side of the head. Bittaker then strangled her until he thought she was dead, but they noticed her eyes were open, at which point Bittaker started to strangle her again while Norris bludgeoned her repeatedly, presumably with the sledgehammer. Both corpses were then thrown off the side of the cliff into a shrubbery below. Halloween can sometimes be the scariest night of the year, as we found out in the B.J. Liskey case 2 weeks ago. If you missed that, I highly suggest you go back and listen to it. On the 31st of October 1979, the pair would abduct their final victim, Shirley Ledford. Whether they were seeking notoriety or not, their actions towards Shirley would give them it. Shirley had been to a Halloween party and was hitchhiking home. It is believed she recognised Bittaker as he frequented the restaurant that she worked in part-time, and accepted the offer of a lift. Norris offered her weed straight up, but she refused. This time, instead of heading towards their beloved fire road, Bittaker drove to a secluded road. Norris pulled a knife out, presumably as they didn't want to struggle as they had done previously. Once again, they bound and gagged her. Unlike the previous times, they would swap roles, with Norris driving aimlessly for more than an hour. Bittaker removed the gag and bounds restraining Shirley. He then proceeded to slap and mock her, beating her with his fists, shouting at her, demanding that she say something. Finally, Shirley would scream, to which Bittaker would shout, "Scream louder!" He would continue to beat her, striking her over and over, shouting at her, "What's the matter? Don't you like to scream?" She began to cry and plead with Bittaker. "No, don't touch me." He responded by ordering her to scream as loud as she wished, before he picked up a hammer and started to hit her over the head with it. He would also punch her breasts, use pliers on her, truly putting her through torture. This was all happening between instances of being raped with forced sodomy. On one occasion, Bittaker recorded the whole thing on a cassette recorder. For any youngsters listening, Google that. It's a very old thing that used to be used back in the day. On the recording, Shirley can be heard pleading for the abuse to end, with cries of "Oh no, no!" as you hear the sound of different tools being taken from the box. Norris described hearing screams, constant screams, coming from the rear of the van. Norris and Bittaker would soon swap places, where Norris would also set the tape recorder away. He is first heard saying, "Go ahead, scream, or I'll make you scream." Shirley responded with, "I'll scream if you stop hitting me." She then lets out several high-pitched screams, which Norris encourages her to continue before ordering her to stop. He then reached for the sledgehammer, where you instantly hear Shirley scream, "Oh no!" as he brings the sledgehammer crashing down onto her left elbow. She informs him that her elbow is broken and pleads, "Don't hit me again." He then raises the sledgehammer once more. Again you hear Shirley scream, "No!" as he brings her crashing down on the same elbow. He would do this another 25 times before asking, "What are you snivelling about?" as she cried and wept in torturous pain. After 2 hours of abuse and torture, Norris grabbed a wire coat hanger, put it around her neck, and then used pliers to tighten it until she died. This was all recorded, and on the tape you can hear the soul has already left her body, as she doesn't really react to the strangulation, even though she died with her eyes open. Several things about this incident don't match up with the normal modus operandi, or MO as I've previously said, but perhaps the strangest of all is that instead of trying to hide her corpse on a mountainside, hoping that animals would dispose of it, Bittaker decided to simply discard her body on a random bed of ivory on a front lawn of a house in Sunland, not Sunderland, Sunland, just to see how the public and media would react. Shirley's body was found the following morning by a jogger running by. The autopsy reported that she had died from strangulation, but she had also been sexually violated, had suffered extensive blunt force trauma to the head, face, breast and left elbow, with her left elbow suffering multiple fractures. Her genitalia and rectum had both been torn, partly due to Bittaker inserting a pair of pliers inside her. Her left hand had been punctured, and a finger on her right hand had been slashed. Following these horrific events, the tape being used as evidence against him, Bittaker would claim that it showed nothing more than a threesome. In the following month, Norris would become reacquainted with an old cellmate, Joseph Jackson. Norris informed him that he and Bittaker were the Toolbox Killer. At first he refused to believe him, even though he gave quite detailed accounts of the events and told him that they took place over the last 5 months. It wasn't until he went into graphic details of the death of Shirley Ledford that he would finally believe him, as up until this point her body was the only one to be found. He even told Jackson that there were another 3 incidents of trying to abduct girls or young women from the streets, with 2 of them managing to get free and flee, and a 3rd who was raped but released. Shocked by what he heard, Jackson went straight to his attorney for advice, who told him and got him to inform the LAPD, who relayed the new information on to the Hermosa Police Department. Detective Paul Byrne was assigned to the case. He took into account the dates which Jackson had passed on to him of the events between June and October, but he stated that they simply did not match up with reports filed of missing teenagers from around that time. Remember way back in part 1 when Bittaker claimed that if I was ever to rape a woman, he would have to kill her, so there would be no witnesses to the crime? Well, for his and Norris's sake, he should have stuck to his own rule. That one female they abducted, raped, but let go, Robin Roebuck, she would be their downfall. When she initially filed her report, she claimed that she had been sprayed with mace by 2 Caucasian males in their mid-30s before being dragged into the back of a van and raped, but she couldn't ID them or the van. Norris told these exact events to Jackson, and when he recounted the story to Byrne, he searched the system and found a match to the incident. He dispatched officers to Robin's house in Oregon to get her to look at a series of mugshots. Without hesitation, she picked 2 photos of the 2 men who raped her on the 30th of September 1979, A1 Lawrence Bittaker and Roy Norris. Norris was immediately put under surveillance, and within days police had observed him dealing weed. On the 20th of November he was arrested for parole violation. On the same day, police arrested Bittaker at his residence at the Burbank Motel for the rape of Robin Roebuck. Both men would be tried for this incident. Even though Robin was able to quickly ID the 2 males from the mugshots, when it came to the police lineup she was unable to match them, more than likely through fear. However, due to observing Norris's dealings with weed and Bittaker having weed on him during his arrest, it was enough for police to hold both males for breaking their parole orders. While searching Bittaker's apartment, police found several Polaroids which matched the information they had received from Joseph Jackson. They also found several bottles of various acidic materials. Inside the van they found a sledgehammer, plastic bag filled with lead weights, a book detailing how to track police radio frequencies, a jar of Vaseline, 2 necklaces which would later be confirmed of being from 2 of the victims, and the tape recording of the rape, torture and murder of Shirley Ledford. Her mother was able to confirm that the voice on the tape was that of her only daughter, Shirley. Inside Norris's apartment, they found Shirley's bracelet. Between the two apartments, police uncovered almost 500 candid photos of teenage girls that had been taken around Redondo and Hermosa Beach, as well as the Burbank High School. Just 10 days after his arrest, Norris was already showing signs of stress and being close to his breaking point. At his preliminary hearing, which was for raping Robin Roebuck, he waived his Miranda rights. At first, he flat out denied any involvement with any of the rapes or murders, but with the evidence starting to be presented before him, he began to confess, although he did attempt to make Bittaker sound more culpable for the murders. In what Detective Byron described as a casual, unconcerned manner, Norris admitted that the pair would pose with teenage girls and offer them weed and beer in the hope to lure them to the van, but 4 girls did not, with the 5th being grabbed into the van by force. He gave details of how they would overpower the females in the van, bound their hands and feet and gag them, before driving to the remote location where they would rape them before murdering their victims. He admitted strangulation was the usual way to do so, normally with a coat hanger. However, 2 victims had ice picks stomped into their heads before being strangled to death. He told how he bludgeoned 13-year-old Jackie Lamp with a sledgehammer, while Bittaker strangled her, and that they planned on using the acid found in Bittaker's apartment on their next victim. He admitted it was him on the tape recording hitting Shirley with the sledgehammer, and that he then strangled her to death with the coat hanger. He claimed that the torture and humiliation that had been forced upon their victims was simply for fun. He also gave details to the police that only the police would have known about, such as their first victim, Lucinda Schieffer, had lost her shoe while being dragged into the back of the van. Elliott County Sheriff Peter Pitchess stated that the victim had been subjected to sadistic and barbaric abuse, and that 5 charges of first-degree murder would be sought after for both men. With regards to the photographs found in the 2 apartments, police had been able to locate 60 of the young females and none of them had been harmed. However, 19 others that the police were able to ID had been reported to have been missing, but there was nothing to suggest they were missing to the hands of these 2 vile individuals. One picture of a young female was found, which was similar to the ones that had been taken of Jackie Gillum and Jacqueline Lamp, where the young girl is forced to pose with Bittaker and Norris. Police had never been able to ID her, however the photo does suggest that there may be another victim, but neither male has ever spoken about her. My fear is that perhaps she was even younger than Jacqueline Lamp. Norris agreed to go with the police to help search for the bodies of the victims. Each time he took them to the area where they disposed of the bodies off the side of the mountain. Lucinda Schieffer's body and Andrea Joy Hall bodies was never recovered. The skeleton remains of both Jackie Gillum and Jacqueline Lamp were found scattered across a 100-foot radius. An ice pick was still lodged inside Jackie's skull. Jacqueline's skull bore multiple indentations matching the descriptions Norris had previously given, where he said he had repeatedly hit her over the head with a sledgehammer. In February 1980, both Bittaker and Norris were formally charged with the murder of all 5 girls. Bittaker was denied bail, however Norris was granted it with a $10,000 fee, or $32,000 in today's money, accounting for inflation. Within 1 month of being charged with murder, Norris accepted a plea deal. He would testify against Bittaker to avoid the death penalty. On March the 18th, 1980, Norris pleaded guilty to 4 counts of first-degree murder, 1 of second-degree, 2 counts of rape, and 1 count of robbery. Norris's probation officer added that Norris never exhibited any remorse or compassion about his brutal acts towards their victims. The defendant appears compulsive in his need to inflict pain and torture upon women. In conclusion, the probation officer testified that Norris can realistically be regarded as an extreme sociopath whose deprived pattern of behaviour is beyond rehabilitation. He was sentenced to 45 years and will be eligible for parole in 2010. Bittaker was charged with 29 acts of kidnapping, rape, sodomy and murder, along with charges for criminal conspiracy, basically planning the whole thing, possession of a firearm. On top of all that, he was charged with 2 counts of conspiracy to commit murder, after he tried to persuade 2 inmates due for release to go and murder Robin Roebuck in order to stop her testifying against him. The charges brought up against him for the rape of Robin would later be dropped due to a lack of evidence and the failure by her to ID the men in the police lineup. When asked by Judge William Hollingsworth as to how he pleaded, Bittaker remained silent, refusing to answer any questions. In response, the judge entered a plea of not guilty on his behalf. Norris would be the key witness in the trial against Bittaker, recalling all the previously mentioned details. Several witnesses came forward and told how Bittaker had shown them the Polaroids of his victims. His defence team tried to have the tape recording omitted from evidence, but the motion was denied. Norris would tell how Bittaker would listen to the recording on repeat while driving around, and he found it to be real funny. Before being played the tape, the jury were warned. For those of you who do not know what hell is like, you will soon find out. Over 100 people were present in the courtroom during the playing of the tape. After hearing it, many openly wept, buried their faces in their hands, dabbed tears away from their eyes, or simply ran out of the room itself. Prosecutioner Stephen Kay was even reduced to tears. He left the courtroom while the judge called a recess. Weeping openly in front of the press, Kay said, "Everybody who has heard that tape has had it affect their lives. I just picture those girls, how alone they were when they died." Bittaker was undisturbed at hearing the content of the tape, smiling throughout hearing the recording. Bittaker testified on his own behalf. He denied knowing about the abduction and the murder of Lucinda Schieffer. He claimed he paid Andrea Hall $200 for posing for him in the photographs, and that Norris had left with her before returning on his own, stating that she would find her own way home. A similar notion was put forward by him with regards to Jackie Gillam and Jacqueline Lamp, claiming they accepted money for sex and posing in the photos, and that he had last seen them in the van with Norris. As for Shirley Ledford, he claimed she agreed to theatrically scream for the tape, and that she was not tortured in his presence. However, she too had been left alone with Norris. His trial lasted 3 weeks in total, and on the February the 17th, after 3 days of deliberating, the jury found Bittaker guilty of 5 counts of first-degree murder, 1 charge of conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, 5 charges of kidnap, 9 charges of rape, 2 charges of forcible oral copulation, 1 charge of sodomy, and 3 charges of unlawfully carrying a firearm. 2 days later, on the 19th of February, it took jurors just 90 minutes to agree that Bittaker should be given the death penalty. On the 24th of March, in accordance with the jury's verdict, Bittaker was formally sentenced to death. In the event that the sentence imposed was ever reverted to life imprisonment, Judge Thomas Fredericks imposed an alternative sentence of 199 years, 4 months imprisonment to take immediate effect. Over the years, Bittaker would appeal against the sentence, with it going to the US Supreme Court on several occasions. During his stay on death row, he granted several interviews. He never showed any remorse for his actions. The only remorse he would show would be the fact that him and Norris got caught. He marvelled that the pair had very little in common when they first met, before adding they had one hell of a lot in common now. Lawrence Bittaker died while incarcerated on death row at San Quentin State Prison on December the 13th, 2019, at the age of 79. His death was reported as being due to natural causes. I'm sure we all can agree it should have been a very painful death at the very least. Norris repeatedly admitted that he enjoyed the actual intercourse with the victims. He claimed only Bittaker enjoyed the act of torture and murder, stating, "I did not enjoy killing, that was Lawrence. It was his favourite part, watching the women struggle to live, knowing he'd soon be taking their life away." In 2009, when Norris was first eligible for parole, he declined to attend, adding another 10 years before he would be eligible again. His parole was denied once again in 2019. Roy Norris died of natural causes at the Californian Medical Facility on February the 24th, 2020, at the age of 72. Throughout his time in jail, he would claim he carried out the murders due to fearing Bettyga. Paul Bynum, the chief investigator of the murders committed by Bittaker and Norris, committed suicide in December 1987. He was only 39 years old. In a 10-page suicide note, Byron specifically referred to the murders committed by Bittaker and Norris as haunting him, and of a fear they may be released from prison. The audio cassette Bittaker and Norris created of themselves raping and torturing Shirley Ledford remains in the possession of the FBI Academy. This recording is now used to train and desensitize FBI agents to the raw reality of torture and murder. Thank you so much for staying with me during this extended two-parter. I felt it was only fair to give the full account and detail of the actions of these vile, vile men. If you have any thoughts, please let me know in the comments below.